Thank you for everybody for coming. So my name's Brandon. I've been active in the Spinnaker community for a couple years now. First at Lookout, where I manage platform engineering, and there I led an effort to implement continuous delivery with Spinnaker. And now I work at Autodesk. I've been there for about 8 months and working on somewhat similar effort. I've given a couple talks at previous Spinnaker summits and other venues, mainly focused on the technical details of implementing Spinnaker. But today I'm going to take a step back and take a look at another set of challenges. So to level set, I assume almost everybody here knows what continuous delivery is, right? Just to look at it, continuous delivery is the ability to be able to get all types of changes, features, configuration, bug fixes, experiments into production into the hands of your users safely and quickly in a sustainable way, right? So in practice, with continuous delivery, you deliver small changes to production in a fully automated fashion. So I actually found this graphic, a discussion on this topic on a blog post, I think from Flow Sports TV, and I really like it. Implementing continuous delivery requires alignment between organization's people, process, and technology, right? So for the people things, it's things like convincing everybody why to do continuous delivery in the first place, right? Convincing your organization continuous delivery is something you should do. And in my experience, that's actually a really significant hurdle, right? And getting teams to decide on what technology choices to use, right? And building customer trust relationships so you can get adoption, right? And then things like process problems, right? CD has implications for business processes like compliance, testing, security controls that are deeply embedded in the way your business operates, right? And I'll talk about some of these later. And then for technology, I'd group in here CD patterns and the platform technology itself. So, and in my experience, right, leading efforts like this, I've found the people and process problems to be much more difficult than the technology, right? I'm not saying that these areas or any of these areas are trivial or don't require any effort, but in my experience, implementing CD, people is the hardest relative to process, and technology is easier than process, right? So I guess another way of saying this is that I never thought that my efforts to implement CD were going to fail because of a technology problem, right? What kept me up at night was the people, culture, and existing business processes that needed to change. So the technology aspects of CD are largely a solved problem, right? I'm not trying to say that the technology aspects of CD are trivial or that they don't matter, but they're easy because they're just largely solved problems. So CD processes and practices are well documented and have been for a really long time, right? Like the Continuous Delivery book by Jez Humble, right, and David Farley, that was released in 2010, right? That's almost a decade ago. Accelerate, has been out for many years. I think it's actually on its second edition. And it outlines, practices of high-performing teams and calls out a lot of many CD best practices. It's been out for many years, right? So when you look at the technology for automating CD, right, there's a long history here. And I think that could almost be its own presentation. It'd be a fun presentation. But the technology part used to be a huge hurdle for CD. In the past, many efforts to implement continuous delivery would get bogged down on the technology. But today, Spinnaker and platforms like it, they exist, right? That's why we're all here. So you no longer have to invest large amounts of engineering effort to build and maintain a platform to implement CD automation. This is a huge advancement that's happened in the last 3 or 4 years. So again, I'm going to focus on some of the people and culture and process challenges I've encountered implementing CD with Spinnaker. At Lookout, and I'm pretty new in this journey at Autodesk, so I'll touch on a few things that we've addressed there. My hope is that some of my experiences will help you in your efforts to implement continuous delivery of Spinnaker. So first, let's start with something that I'd place in the people category. And this is how to convince your organization that investing in CD is a worthwhile endeavor, right? Implementing CD is a really costly endeavor for your organization, right? It requires many changes to the way software is developed and released. everyone from executives, product managers, engineering leaders, they need to understand what CD practices can do for their business. My experience is this is often one of the most difficult challenges and where I most often thought I might fail. So let's look at like some of the things that I've used to try to sell CD to organizations in the past. So first, obviously, increased velocity, right? Delivering features and bug fixes faster to your customer faster than the competition is a huge competitive advantage, right? Code that sits dormant, waiting to be released is value that's just sitting there collecting dust because it's not in the hands of your customers yet. Increase engineering efficiency and productivity, right? CD automation allows your teams to spend less time operating their services and infrastructure and more time focusing on delivering customer value. Improving service resiliency, right? CD simply enables teams to release features and bug fixes faster with higher quality. This can have great impacts on your service resiliency and improve your customer experiences. So in improving cost efficiency, this one's probably a little bit more indirect, but what often keeps teams from optimizing their infrastructure and their spend is the cost and time and stability it takes to achieve a new desired state. Right, so standardizing the management and validation of infrastructure and infrastructure updates and code deployments lowers the effort needed to execute things like right sizing. So I don't think you're going to find anyone, right, that disagrees with any of these things. These all seem great things for a software company to focus on. They all seem like great things. So I don't think most people will agree with you here. I've also found it really helpful to agree with your organization on some common metrics that you can use to measure the quality of your software release cycle. This gives you a baseline upon which you can demonstrate improvements. Many of these come from the Accelerate book, but we've added a few of them here, the ones with the asterisks, to kind of add a dimension of engineering efficiency, right? So, lead time is the time it takes to code to get to production after it's been committed. Deployment frequency, how often do you deploy a service? Change fail percentage, right? How many of your changes result in a failure or an incident? Mean time to restore, how quickly can you recover from an incident? The human MTTR, which is the amount of human time it takes to restore from an incident, is something that kind of comes into play when you're implementing metric-based canaries. And the human time to deploy, this is a huge one, right? This is the time it actually takes an engineer to execute a deployment. And time to onboard. So I kind of added this one here. This is a little bit harder to measure, but how long it takes an engineer to be able to be comfortable onboarding to deploy a new service. So say you've outlined, what CD can do for your organization, and you most likely have the attention of some people, but maybe not everyone, right? But that's okay. At Lookout, I only had a handful of leadership and even less engineering and product that were convinced that what I was proposing was the right path forward. That's okay. My advice is to not get caught up on trying to get consensus across your organization, right? Instead, find allies, right? And then move forward with the implementation. At Lookout, we followed a program much like this, right? We identified a pilot team. We spent a good amount of time trying to look at all the possible customers, finding the perf team. We wanted somebody that had a valuable service, a service that was valuable to the organization, and also teams that had the technical chops to be able to help us get this done, right? So we did one POC service, right? Then we went on to a beta where we did 5 services. And after the beta, we kind of paused. So yeah, after we'd onboarded 5 services, we kind of went back and collected some of these metrics, of before and after metrics, right? And as you can see here, these were huge steps in efficiency, right? So steps to deploy a service into production, depending on the set of tooling, it would take about 25 steps, went to 1 to 3 steps. And this was huge for Lookout because a lot of our incidents were caused by manual human error in the deployment process. Engineering time to deploy, so this is the amount of time it takes an engineer to deploy a service, went from 60 minutes to less than a minute, right? This represents a massive increase in engineering efficiency. Automation time to deploy, right? This is, went from 60 minutes to 31 minutes. That's just how long the process takes as a whole. Engineering time to patch. So, we did FedRAMP at Lookout, and we ended up having to patch at a very aggressive cadence. For some services that we did in the beta, that took 5 days for them to go begin to end to like test their whole service and patch it. That we fully automated the patching of all services with Spinnaker. And onboarding time, it was like how long it takes an engineer to learn and be comfortable deploying a service, went from 3+ days to about 30 minutes. So this demonstrated like quantifiable results, right, with huge impacts on our business. After we did our beta, we kind of went on a roadshow and kind of took these metrics and took our demos around. And executives like they fast-tracked the project and eventually made it the #1 engineering priority to implement CD with Spinnaker over a couple quarters. Engineering teams were also, once we showed them these metrics, they were also really eager. Maybe, Dan will probably remember, maybe a little too eager, right? We kind of had a little bit of a stampeding herd to onboard to Spinnaker. And over the next 1.5 years, we onboarded about 200 services to Spinnaker. And again, like greatly increased our engineering efficiency, and feature velocity also greatly increased. I remember a story about this where the CDO, our Chief Development Officer, said the CEO came to her and was like, "Why are we delivering so many more like things now on the roadmap? What's going on?" And we tied it back to implementing CD with Spinnaker. So yeah, now let's look at another problem. And this is another people challenge, right? I spent a lot of time on this. Another people challenge I found is like how to get decisions made on what technologies to use, right? So unless you're lucky enough to start from scratch, right, like total greenfield, it's probably a safe assumption that your organization already has tooling or multiple sets of tooling to deploy code changes. This can actually be a very sensitive and high-touch decision to navigate. So, I'm going to look at Lookout specifically. This is the situation we were in when we started the effort, right? At Lookout, we had many different sets of deployment tooling that have been created over the years. There was like CK1, Igniter, Blackbird, that was my attempt, Chef Repo, Linac. We even had a team doing Nix. I don't know. Who here has even heard of Nix? No? Okay, anyway. All of these things had succeeded in onboarding significant portions of our services, right? And all of them had teams and people who had built them, used them, and supported them, right? And many of these teams had a certain significant amount of attachment to what they had built, right, and what they were using, which is totally normal, right? I think I find this one entertaining. Here's a list of all the technologies that were used by each platform, right? It's Chef, Terrible, Ansible, Beanstalk, even Nix, right? Like I mentioned, I think if we would have implemented like Salt Stack or Puppet, we could say we had everything. So where were we left, right? What we were left was like many different paths to production, each with its own pitfalls and quirks, right? Each set of tooling had its own workflows, features, strong points, weak points. And this wasn't ideal for many reasons, right? So I kind of went about trying to make a case of why this was not an ideal situation. And this is kind of how I attacked that problem. One, like pointing out that each tool set requires a separate team to maintain and extend, right? This is obviously very inefficient. Each one of those paths to production required its own individual effort to fix bugs, implement new features, right? This led to a huge amount of duplicate effort and wasted resources. That was pretty obvious. Second, capabilities were not consistent across tool sets, right? Efforts to add new features to, say, one tool set were not easily, transferable to others, right? So we had these, some teams had some really advanced capabilities on one set of tooling, but then they were missing some really basic capabilities that other sets of tooling had. With this fragmentation, you lose the leverage to be able to add a new capability to your platform, and it immediately become available to everyone. And finally, engineering experience was not consistent across all the teams, right? So if you have an engineer working on one team, she cannot easily transfer to another team, right? The learning curve's very steep, and you lose a lot of ability to be able to quickly juice certain efforts, right? Because you can't take services and say, kind of put them on the back burner, transfer them to another team easily. This was a big problem with our agility. So all of these problems at Lookout, like that I just talked about, were kind of at the core of all of our engineering efficiency and service reliability problems. So what we sought to do was to implement one intentional platform, right? So kind of made the case that we don't need all these multiple platforms or multiple sets of tooling. We want one platform, right? And we kind of pitched this platform as being kind of like a paved road, that get all of our customers quickly to production safely and securely, with all the best practices baked into the platform and making the easy way the right way. But we had tried this before, right? And we already ended up fragmented. And so we kind of took a step back and we looked at, what are we going to do different this time? Right, and at first, we treated the platform as a product. This may seem obvious, but I think it's kind of like the curse of internal tools teams to build a solution and just expect their customers to use it, right? We really sought to understand our customers and really understand how they view their problems, right? At Autodesk, this practice is much more advanced. And we have like a dedicated UX experts to help us with customers and interacting with customers. It's a really great resource. We wanted to embrace transparency in everything we do to build trust, right? Also, we wanted to iterate, right? Rather than, going into the lab and trying to build something perfect and coming in and handing it to our customers when we thought it was done, we sought to get the tools in their hands as quickly as possible and learn from their feedback. And then I think as you saw, is from the POC to the beta to the GA thing that we had earlier, wanted to follow a marketing and an adoption strategy. Again, this is also, when I joined Autodesk, I was really impressed. They already do this really well, right? Like picking your customers, making them successful, and really marketing their success. We actually have somebody in our org that helps us do this, making videos and stuff like that, so it's really great. And then obviously make easy way the right way, right? I kind of talked about that a little bit before. So another thing that we wanted to do differently is embrace the community, right? We really view that every line of code that we write is a liability. We looked at all the existing solutions that we had and asked ourselves, okay, if we open source this, would it attract a community, right, that would come and maintain and extend it? And the answer was no for all of them. So there's why keep working on them then, right? Recent advancements in industry, advances with commonly available open source projects have made it no longer necessary to build and manage your own deployment automation infrastructure. So we wanted to embrace standard open source tools. And I firmly believe that there are many advantages to using open source platforms with large and vibrant communities over closed source solutions. So enter Spinnaker, right? At Lookout and Autodesk, we decided to choose Spinnaker as our single CD platform. I'm going to go over some of the main reasons we decided on using Spinnaker, or even maybe a little bit more. I'm just going to go over the slides that I'm sure everybody here at Autodesk is really tired of seeing these, but that I've been using to pitch Spinnaker, right? So most of you probably already know this, everything that's in these slides, but these are the actual, this is the actual slides that I've been going around pitching and how we came to the conclusion to use Spinnaker. So first, one of the main drivers, right, and I think this is really obvious, is the size of the strength of the Spinnaker community itself, right? Adoption of Spinnaker has really started a hockey stick in the past few years, and it's quickly becoming the de facto open source CD platform, or it already is. There's teams of engineers at Spinnaker, are working on Spinnaker from Netflix, Google, Armory, Pivotal, Oracle, Microsoft. I mean, the commitment of the main public cloud providers in many ways future-proofs the platform. That was a big selling point. And I guess everybody here kind of knows this, but explaining that at the core of Spinnaker is you can build very expressive pipelines that meet your release process, right? And it has a great UI for being able to manage and interact with these pipelines. And also how it provides a single pane of glass is a huge selling point, right? When we have a lot of multi-region deployments or deployments that are striped across different cloud providers, the ability to be able to see the status of all these things in one UI is also a huge selling point that I've used. And I mean, one of the main reasons, and this really gets into like a really high-level strategy, but Spinnaker has a really elegant abstraction between your deployment logic and the reference runtimes themselves, right? I mean, there's many levels of abstraction you can implement between an engineer writing code and the underlying cloud primitives, right? Where and how you implement those abstractions is kind of the key to operating efficiently while having the needed flexibility. And so this is a really powerful abstraction because it gives you the flexibility to adopt and experiment with different cloud providers and platforms without having to retool or change customer experience. Like I said, like decisions around like cloud providers and other platforms are really highly strategic, right? The decisions to say use Kubernetes or AWS, Azure, GCP, right? Or to use different ones at the same time. This abstraction provides your business the ability to be able to make these decisions easily without the burden of having to change your deployment process or the user experience. Yeah, so at Lookout, we decided to replace many sets of our in-house built tools with Spinnaker. So another interesting people challenge that we had, though, with this is like, what happens to all of those people that worked on those tools previously, right? All the tools that we were replacing. There's kind of like lingering question of like, okay, this thing that I've worked on for years, we're now replacing it with something that kind of already exists. What do I do now? So at Lookout, we took many of the engineers. Oh, this thing keeps popping up. We took many of the engineers that worked on these previous sets of tooling, and we actually came together and we built the ECS provider for Spinnaker, right? I think Danielle's here. Danielle worked on that effort, right? And we contributed back to the community. So rather than toiling on their own platforms and their own internal tools, right, we were able to engage the Spinnaker community and make a large contribution to the ecosystem. This is good for the careers of everybody that worked on it, and also good for the community. You know that thing that we were talking about earlier, or that I was saying earlier about like every line of code you write is a liability? That kind of changes a little bit when you write the code and you commit it back to the community, right? So for instance, like we built the ECS provider at Lookout, but now it's largely maintained by a team at Amazon. So one more key to our success has been our partnership with Armory. They have been a big part of my success implementing CD with the Spinnaker. They come in and they were able to help us operationalize Spinnaker in our environment, kind of an enterprise-grade implementation, so that our team could immediately start working with customers. This allowed us to quickly demonstrate value. They also offered really good support around best practices and patterns, and even provided development support when we were working on the ECS provider. So another challenge, this is kind of like and I put this in probably the process piece. Another challenge that I've had to overcome is working around compliance and security controls. Well, I guess not working around, working with compliance and security controls to implement fully automated CD, right? One major note that I'll make here that I've learned kind of the hard way is you want to involve your security and compliance teams in your efforts as soon as possible, right? You don't really want to get too far in your implementation without involving them in the conversation. But depending on the practices of your company, right, you're going to need their partnership and their contributions. So one of the common challenges that I've come across is the perception that with regards to change to software and infrastructure, speed is dangerous and slow is safe, right? This is kind of a pervasive idea that's pretty common. Often many compliance and security controls are built around this idea, right? But the problem is that this mindset actually leads to processes that involve more inspection, approval, change windows, change review boards, et cetera. All trying to slow down and change, trying to slow down change, thinking it will provide stability. But the problem with these practices is that it leads to larger releases, which leads to like more spectacular failures, release anxiety and stress for everyone involved. I remember at Lookout, we used to do, for some of our major services, we would do these like bi-weekly, by-sprint releases. And they were so painful. Everybody was so stressed out. And multiple rollbacks, weekends ruined, stuff like that. So CD patterns and processes are kind of are meant to address this flawed idea. So with CD, right, like speed is safety. Fully automated CD minimizes the risk of shrinking the size of changes and delivering features and bug fixes faster to the customer. This is a fundamental mind shift that in my experience, you just kind of have to address head on. So now I'm going to give us, here's a specific example of a compliance control change that we're working on at Autodesk. So actually, Mark Webb, who's sitting up here in front, has been leading this effort at Autodesk. And at Autodesk, the deployment workflow was kind of hampered by compliance controls, which required manager approval for changes getting promoted between environments. Engineers had to wait for approval for their manager to promote and release between environments. This greatly slowed down and prevents like a fully automated process. Also, one of the major flaws is the person making these approvals often has no context about the change itself, right? So you could just be sitting there clicking for it doesn't matter, right? I actually I got a few of these because I was someone's proxy for a while, and I would get like 20 of them a day, and I just had no idea what was going on with them, so just approve them. So we recently worked with the compliance team to modify our compliance and security controls to allow for fully automated CD. So as you can see here, rather than requiring approval for things to be promoted, say between dev and staging or staging and prod, right? We've kind of moved with the idea that once something is merged to master, it's automatically approved to go to production. So we've actually kind of shifted left all the compliance controls and putting that approval in the hands of the people themselves that actually have the context and know about the change. So one more thing, and I think that this kind of falls into the category of maybe the effects of CD, of implementing Spinnaker and CD that I've seen in organizations. Not really necessarily something that specifically at Lookout, not something that I anticipated. And I call it DevOps Transformation. But so at Lookout, this is how teams were generally organized before we started implementing CD with Spinnaker, right? The little gray people are software engineers, little blue people are DevOps engineers. So we had all these product teams, right, that had software engineers and embedded DevOps engineers, right? And then we also had these tooling teams that were supporting the different sets of tooling. After we implemented CD with Spinnaker, we kind of naturally morphed into a different organizational structure, right? Where we removed all the embedded DevOps engineers from the teams themselves because they were no longer needed in the teams. So, treating the platform as a product, and taking the operations that these DevOps engineers actually did for the teams and implementing them as features in the platform allowed for the software engineers to own all aspects of the services by themselves. This is, I guess, called like an end-to-end service ownership model. This actually was, I didn't anticipate this, but it also greatly increased our efficiency and our agility because these DevOps engineers were no longer like a bottleneck to launching a new team. So yeah, at Autodesk, when I joined, they kind of already anticipated this, and they're actually kind of leading this as more of a managed thing that we're actually just driving towards as a program. So yeah, that's it. Does anybody have any questions? Yep.
A quick question on that. Have you done the time frame of this journey and then where you are now and then how mature is what you are?
So I'll talk about Lookout. So on the previous slide, I can go back to it. And I actually removed the dates specifically for this presentation. I probably should have kept them. For identifying the pilot team to the POC, this is where Armory really helped us a lot, right? Because we wanted to immediately get one service up and deployed. They kind of came in and helped us do that. I think with that took us 3 weeks to a month to get that set up. And then beta was about another 2 months. But there was a significant gap between beta and GA because what we actually had to do was, we wanted this onboarding for service teams to be fully self-service. So we spent a lot of time building some automation, building onboarding guides, right, and stuff like that. So between beta and GA, I think there was about 6 months. And we were always onboarding services in between beta and GA, but but it took us about 6 months to get to GA. And then the onboarding process, that took about a year and a half.
So you're kind of 2 years into this now?
Yeah, so I'm not at Lookout anymore. I'm at Autodesk, we're in a very different place. Like we already had a really awesome platform called CloudOS that a lot of people run on now. And we're just in the process of putting Spinnaker into CloudOS. So yeah, we're much earlier in our Spinnaker journey at Autodesk. Yep.
You talked about moving the approval process
Yep.
on the left side where the changes go into the master. Can you talk more about how that was implemented, how it worked, if bugs were found, that outages happened in production after the rollout and stuff?
So, yeah, so the question is, when I talked about shifting left the compliance controls, so where we are with this right now is we've just had the conversation with compliance about it, and they've green-lighted it. We haven't started to implement it yet. And actually, Mark Webb is the one that's leading this effort. I'm not actually leading this effort, but the idea is that the control will be around it be implemented in GitHub itself, right? So certain users will be approved to be able to merge stuff to master.
So historically with compliance, we have lots of controls around who is a code owner allowed to go into production. So there's a lot of complexity on the people process side. It's not really that big of a technical problem. So the conversation actually technically was easy, but from a business standpoint, it's talking with our auditors for our various SOC 2 controls, etc. It's talking with our internal compliance teams to really allow the ownership of that production approval to go to the developers and have all of the proof in those in the audit trail for that is really where a lot of the work was.
So related to that, do you have go-no-go meetings where all the parts, so development is one component, but usually you have quality teams, you have your infrastructure teams, is there any conflicts? Did that all shift to some of the PR? And if so, is your pipeline completely void of any new information, new test runs, new regressions that could affect decision-making or go-no-go type of experiences?
Yeah, the old model was very manual, and we would have approvals both at the service team level, pretty typically an engineering manager or a QA manager. That's one level, and then there would be another person from a compliance team that would need to be part of that. And in that latter case, they had no knowledge, they had no context of what the software does and what the challenges do. And so one of the things we spent a lot of time over the last couple of years doing was building into our process thorough compliance around proving that things have been automatically tested to a certain level of rigor, and then that becomes one of the check marks that allows that compliance to go through much more quickly and that approval to go much more quickly.
You try to basically automate the policies associated with the people making the decision.
Correct.
I'm there to say, did you do
Yeah.
this?
Yep.
So instead of asking that question, you just codify it.
Yeah, and by standardizing the pipeline, even before Spinnaker, standardizing the pipeline really simplifies the conversation you have with compliance and with the auditors. So that's a really, really important factor. So there's a push and pull on both sides, and we're trying to meet in the middle there.
Yeah, and relative to like Spinnaker pipelines too, Mark has been working on this a lot, is like to not lose that leverage or that compliance leverage, like we really need people to use the same pipeline, right? So we're trying to figure out how we can like standardize the pipeline at Spinnaker, but also allow people certain extensibility that they need, right, within that template pipeline.
And from our perspective, we have hundreds, maybe thousands of services across hundreds of products. And each of their products has their own audit chain when it comes to getting SOC 2, for example, for their customers. And so if each team has to do that independently, that's a massive burden, it's massive toil. And so standardizing on the language and then standardizing on the tooling and standardizing on the automated checks and balances is critical for.
And you don't have a change management board, I mean, like,
We-
you approve an actual deployment in the sense of, seeing if there's conflict with firewall changes or.
Yeah, we ditched CAB in spring, the change approval board, and engineers were incredibly happy.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And the CAB team, they could go do much more interesting things. So yeah, and our auditors are fine with that, with the right evidence in our audit trail.
Any other questions?
Awesome, thank you.